Hi everyone, this is Counseling 3010, Elementary Principles of Composition, and we're going to talk about the 5-paragraph essay, sometimes also known as the 6-paragraph essay. All right, so freedom and choice. Writing can take endless forms and styles, right? Determine the shape of what is to come and pursue that shape. So what we're doing here is we're going to introduce you to common writing ways that people use, especially if you're a beginning writer, or if you're trying to understand how writing exists in psychology. Again, this is just one perspective. It really does depend on your instructor and the field that you're working in and the expectations and stuff like that. So it can vary. I just want to give you some of the basics that most people share, and then you take it to wherever you need to take it. All right, so let's start with paragraph. After a paragraph has been written, examine it to see whether division will improve it. So what that means is when it says division will improve it is, should we break it down to several smaller paragraphs? Here's an example. I have received students writing where their entire research paper, let's say it's 6 pages long, is one long paragraph. So when you do that, it's really hard to pick and choose where the topics are, what the ideas are, and stuff like that, because it's just one gigantic jumble of words, right? Imagine when you're texting someone. Some people text messages that are really long where you have to scroll through the whole thing, right? Whereas other people, when they text a thought in each of those bubbles, and then they'll, one thought, they'll press return to send it, and then they'll do another thought for another bubble. That's what we're looking for, is organized so that we can understand how, because that way, you know how when you respond to a text message, you can touch it and then you can respond to that specific one, right? But if it's a really long text, when you respond, they're like, well, which part of it are you responding to? Right? So again, think about it maybe that way to help you understand that you want to have different smaller paragraphs that pertain to one specific topic so that it's easy to read. It shows that you know how to organize your ideas and your thoughts. So division into topics will aid the reader, will help the reader. The beginning of each paragraph is a signal that a new subject has been reached. Rules. Single sentences should not be written as paragraphs. So a one sentence should not really constitute as a paragraph. There are exceptions. When writing dialogue, single word paragraphs are allowed. So writing dialogue means quoting someone where it's a physical talking of something that is being documented into a paper. For us, when writing case notes and you're directly quoting. So again, when you quote something, yeah, you can leave it as a paragraph because that's really just a statement from a person that you're recording. Begin each paragraph either with a topic sentence or a transition sentence. The opening sentence simply indicates the direction the paragraph will take. So usually when you start a paragraph, you're talking about a specific idea. So for example, in your final paper that you're writing, you're expected to introduce 3 new concepts to help your presenting problem, right? So topic 1, the beginning sentence should relate to the topic 1 introduction that you're wanting to do. And then topic 2 or paragraph 2 will describe what's going on with that idea to help with the presenting problem. And then part 3 will then represent the other part. So now let's talk about active voice. Active voice is basically the style, the feeling, the tone of how you're writing something. So there's active voice, which is direct and alive. So it sounds interesting. It sounds like it's happening right here. Passive would be the other way. Passive is kind of like you're reading it, but it doesn't sound like you're being, in them here and now, right now. So here's an example. The correct way is to say, I shall always remember my first visit to Boston. So it's very to the point and it describes everything, at this moment. Here's the incorrect or passive voice. My first visit to Boston will always be remembered by me. Okay, so one is direct, one sounds confident, whereas the other one, although it's still expressing the same idea, sounds weak, sounds sad, sounds kind of like, you're kind of like remembering things as opposed to enjoying that remembrance or that memory. Here's another example. The correct way is failing health compelled him to leave college, right? So immediately you know exactly why, the reason he is leaving school. Here's the incorrect or passive. The reason he left college was that his health became impaired. So again, the topic is very similar, but there's a lot of words. It is also passive. It's not like here and now explaining exactly what's going on. I know for some of you guys, when you were taught in high school or other college classes, that you want to fill it up. You want to fill up that 10,000 word paper or whatever. So you're going to try to use as many words as possible to describe one thing, right? What we're telling you now that you are finishing up your schooling or continuing to finish up to your bachelor's degree, is that we don't want to hear all that extra words. Okay, we want you to just let us know what's going on in a direct, lively way that shows thought, ideas, and that are active, like strong, confident. It sounds like you know what you're talking about. The other way is kind of like you're trying to just use as many words as possible to fill up the pages. Teachers don't like that once you become a professional, and your bosses in your professional world will also not want to see that as well. Positive form 1. So make definite assertions. That means make sure that you are saying the things that you want to say. Okay? It doesn't sound like you are hesitating. You know, like when someone goes, "Do you want chocolate or vanilla ice cream?" And you're like, maybe I should get vanilla, right? Even though you're choosing vanilla, it doesn't sound very confident. It doesn't sound like you're asserting yourself. Instead, if someone goes, "Do you want chocolate or vanilla ice cream?" You're going to go, "I want the vanilla ice cream." So then it sounds like you know exactly what you want, right? Again, both ways are saying the exact same thing, which is that you want vanilla. One sounds like you don't know what you're really talking about, or you're very hesitant and unsure, not confident. So here is an example of a correct. He usually came late, right? The incorrect would be he was not very often on time. Again, same thing. However, one sounds direct to the point. He usually came late, as opposed to he was not very often on time. Here's another one that's correct is she thought the study of Latin was a waste of time. Again, very to the point, right? As opposed to she did not think that studying Latin was a sensible way to use one's time. Again, same thing, just a lot more words for saying the exact same thing, and it doesn't necessarily sound very confident. So again, like we were talking about before, sometimes you use a lot of words because you want to fill up a paper, right? Again, stop doing that. Just start using the right words so it's clear, to the point, and confident. So instead of saying he is not honest, you want to say he is dishonest. It's a lot easier. It's a nice word. It is clear. Another one is not important, should be replaced with something like trifling. Or if it's not that strong, when it says not important, you know, you can say some other word. 3, did not remember. That means forgot. So just say he forgot. You don't have to say he did not remember. Another one is did not pay attention to, which is just ignored. And then did not have much confidence in is really distrusted. Okay, here's an example. He showed satisfaction as he took possession of his well-earned reward. That's a lot of words. What does that really mean? It just sounds really confusing, jumbled. It feels like a lot of words. So instead, you should say he grinned as he pocketed the coin. Okay, or he is happy when he put his money in his wallet. It's a lot more clear, you know, and it's still, again, the same feeling, the same point. It's just written in a different way where people will understand exactly what you're saying. Here are other words that you can omit because they're needless words. The question as to whether should be just whether, okay? Because whether means one or the other already, so you don't have to say the question as to whether, you just say whether or not, right? So number 2 is he is a man who. We don't need to know all that. We should just say he. Let's say he is a man who loves to read newspapers. Instead you say he loves to read newspapers. That's good enough. Again, you're trying to reduce the amount of words because you don't want it to be all over the place. It's so many words for really something that you can say really quickly. Here's another one. This is a subject that. Instead, just say the subject is blah, blah, blah. Another one is here, let's see, her story is a strange one. You can just say her story is strange. The reason why is that. Instead, you just say because. Another one is owing to the fact that, and then you can replace that with since. And then 7 was I was unaware of the fact that. Instead, you can just say, I was unaware that blah, blah, blah. Okay? Again, using stronger, clear, confident words in your paper make you sound like you know what you're talking about. But when you use a lot of words to just fill up a paper, it sounds like you don't really know maybe what you're trying to say, or you're still trying to learn how to choose the right words. Okay, now let's talk about the 5-paragraph essay, sometimes the 6-paragraph essay, and I'll explain why it's 6 instead. Because again, the 5-paragraph essay is kind of something that you learned probably when you were in elementary school and stuff like that. But as you go into college, even though the structure may be similar, there's more parts to it, but the overall feel is still the same. Okay, so basic. Teaches students how to format and structure. Okay, visualize the 3 parts of an essay and then organize your thoughts. So basically, by remembering 5 parts, you know exactly what part is happening when and where and why. Okay, once students master this, they can expand it to a larger format, which is what I'm talking about when I was talking about psychology papers and stuff like that. Although there's 5 components to it, there's more writing, there's more paragraphs in each section. All right, let's talk about the structure. Visualize the structure. Create an outline if needed, and it's highly recommended. So when you, let's say, meet with me to talk about your paper, I would love to see an outline, right? So have the 5 different components, and then tell me what you're planning on filling each one with in terms of like your research. Okay, so the 3 parts, although there's 5 of them, is introduction, which is the thesis statement or the statement of purpose. And then you're going to have 3 parts, which are supporting. So that means the 3 components that you're introducing, right? That's right, there's 4. And then the last part is the conclusion or the summary of what you just wrote for the reader to understand that you're going to finish up and stop talking now. So each paragraph should be between 5 to 7 sentences in length. Okay, so when you write a paragraph, it's usually about 5 to 7 sentences long. So sometimes you might need a lot more. So you can break it into 2 paragraphs in that section, and that's totally fine as well. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go along. All right, here, I know the font is a little bit small. I just wanted to fit in what a outline would look like, okay? So this is a structure example. So introduction of the topic is the first one. So you might have a paragraph that talks about the broad topic of that you're talking about. And then the second paragraph may talk about the presenting problem, which is a thesis, right? And then the third paragraph might talk about the current methods that may exist to deal with this presenting problem, but it isn't working so great, which is why you're introducing 3 new points. So what I'm saying here is the introduction is composed of a bunch of different parts, right? One is you need to talk about the topic. So let's say it might be autism. So one paragraph might be about the behaviors of autism. Another paragraph is like, what you want to talk about, which is the presenting problem. Maybe it's autism and school, right? So then you need to talk a little bit about, how many students go to school with autism maybe. So statistics and stuff like that. And then the third paragraph might be, well, this is how the Office of Students with Disabilities helps students with autism go to school. So you have some more additional facts that are current right now. Again, none of this is really your opinion. These are all areas that you've researched and now you're kind of letting us know, okay? So that's part 1. And then part 2 would be the first point, right? So the first paragraph may talk about a specific technique that you found in your research, right? And then the paragraph 2 may talk about how you would apply that to your presenting problem. Okay, and then point 2 is the next section. So you might have a paragraph that talks about that specific technique, and then paragraph 2 would be how to apply that technique to your presenting problem. And then you do it again with point 3, where you bring up in the first paragraph a specific technique or idea, and then paragraph 2 may talk about how to apply the technique to your presenting problem. And then this is the part where, remember how I said there was 5 or 6? So this one could add, and it's called the refutation or the counter argument. Okay, so it does depend on the type of paper that you're going to write, but paragraph 1 may talk about the current ideas that are opposite of your idea. And paragraph 2 may talk about how it may work, but that your 3 points may be considered to be more effective. So what we're doing is we're trying to make it so that your argument is even more persuasive, more strong, because you might say, although currently right now, this is how we do it, it's not necessarily helping a lot of people, right? So that you're trying to basically kind of make it so that you acknowledge that there are other ways to do it or there are other acceptable ways to do it. However, you want to offer some new ideas in your paper. Okay, that reason makes you, or the reason why we do a counter argument or refutation paper is to say, yeah, I acknowledge that there are other ways to do this. Okay, but I think my way is better. That's what it is. So depending on your paper, you might need to have that in your writing. And then, of course, a summary or the conclusion of it. So if you want to, you can copy this down and then write this as your outline for your paper. If you look at the specific example that I give you in class, I give you a sample paper, right? We talk about a specific topic and why is it so important right now for you to read about it. And then I say, here is one counseling technique that is going to help that, and this is how you would apply it, or why this would be something you would want to apply to it. And then here's another counseling technique and why it could be put into this topic. And then here's another technique, so forth and so on, right? So this is what I'm talking about. If you are ever lost, copy down the structure and then start filling it in this way, and then you can start writing your paper once you do all your research. All right, so the first part of the paper that you're writing will be the introduction. So that's the topic of your essay, the benefits of going to therapy. That's an example, right? Then you want to list 3 points that you want to discuss. Point 1, point 2, point 3. 3 different areas on why there are benefits to going to therapy. It might be something like improving your relationship with your family. It might be boosting your confidence, and it could be also something else, right? So finalize your ideas with an ending sentence. So here is something that you might want to say is, through empirical research, the 3 reasons mentioned above are strong arguments for seeking therapy in a regular basis. So as you can see right here, we're summarizing really quickly why this will be a good idea. So when you talk about your introduction, you want to also set up for your thesis statement. Your thesis statement should always be an attention getter. It leads in. So background information to set up the thesis, and then the thesis and the essay map, which is basically you're going to say the 3 different topics so that when we read, we can see topic 1, topic 2, topic 3 in the following paragraphs, okay? And then you do a concluding statement like we said before. So an attention getter or lead-in would be an intriguing statement. Intriguing means interesting and kind of like, ooh, what's that all about? Statistical statement is a statement that talks about numbers, like 43% of people are blah, 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 okay? Or rhetorical question. Rhetorical question is a question that you don't necessarily want people to answer. You just want them to think about it. So, like there's no answer. So example would be, what is the meaning of life? Right? We really don't have an answer to that. However, we can start to think about what are some possible answers, but we don't necessarily need to know. Okay, that's a rhetorical question. And then a proverb. A proverb is basically a well-known quote or speech. Okay. All right, now you want to set up for your thesis. So you want to gradually narrow down. So when you do a thesis or you're introducing a presenting problem, you're going to start broadly. Talk about autism, right? Let's say, for example. But then you start to bring it down to male autism, or maybe it is children with autism, or maybe elderly people with autism. You start to narrow it down closer and closer and closer to where you want to focus on. Because if you have it really broad, there's so many things that you can talk about that your paper is going to be really vague and not clear, okay? And it's okay that you, let's say you want to really talk about autism and you want to cover all these things. What we've learned in writing is that for this specific assignment or this specific paper, just choose a very narrow specific one. And then you're going to write another paper later on about another one. And then you're going to write another paper about another. So when you add all those things together, you look at, you've actually covered a lot about autism, but it shows focus in each one of those. Okay, so you want to gradually narrow down. Provide background information, explain underlying information, describe the complexity of the issue. Why does this issue still exist? Maybe there's reasons why, right? It's maybe because parents who don't speak English don't understand how to work with teachers and their IEPs, maybe, or something like that. And then, of course, introduce layers of the subject. Again, a lot of things are there, a lot of layers. You can't just solve it by just doing one thing. Maybe there's other reasons why. Okay, and so a thesis map and an essay map, which is basically the structure, state the thesis clearly with the 3 points. Again, you want to be able to, in an outline, show exactly what your presenting problem is, and then also what are your suggestions that you have found through research. All right, let's break down the thesis statement a little bit more. Number 1, encapsulates the essay's main argument in a succinct one-sentence comment. It could also be 2 sentences. But encapsulate basically means being able to understand the whole big picture. Okay, so being able to understand the whole big picture of the essay, main argument in 1 succinct or 2 succinct statements. 2, has a clearly stated opinion, but do not bluntly announce the opinion. So, has a clearly stated opinion, but do not bluntly announce the opinion. So basically, you want to avoid saying things like, in this essay, I will talk about the ways how you can help with autism. Okay? You can just say, these 3 techniques will address autism in this specific way. Okay? Again, remember we talked about being confident and being short. You know, you don't want to use 1,000 words to describe something that you can use 5 words for. Okay. 3, narrow enough to write a focused essay having 3 points. Again, you want to have a very specific point, right? The sample paper I said is for people who are sex workers when they want to leave sex work, right? So they want to quit doing that instead. So how can you do that with counseling? Okay. 4, forceful and direct. Again, confidence. We want to hear students write like they know what they're talking about, not kind of like, oh, I don't know, and maybe this is good. No one wants to read a paper like that. People want to go, bam, bam, bam. You know, you go, oh, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. You're going to trust them. So again, confidence. 5, don't soften with token phrases, such as, so you want to avoid these things, in my opinion, or I think in a paper. Right? You usually will remove yourself from the I statement and just start writing because we understand that this is all your own writing. So we know this is your version or your research and how you analyzed it. We don't need to hear you say I throughout your paper because we already know that this paper that's written by you, that these are all your thoughts. Okay? Don't do these things. Number 1, bluntly announce the essay's intent. Again, avoid, in this essay, I will, blah, blah, blah. 2, apologize for the materials that is being written. So you want to avoid things like, in my humble opinion, because in my humble opinion means kind of like, I know that like you might think this other way, but this is how I think. But like, you know, I don't want to offend you, so I'm going to say it's my humble opinion. So again, it doesn't sound confident. Okay? 3, include random information that has nothing to do with the essay. And this is something that sometimes when you don't really know what you're writing about, you start doing. You add all these other things into it, and you're like, whoa, that was a big thing that you just brought in, but then you stop talking about it. Again, so you want to narrow down, and again, do not, and this is, I think, when it comes to editing is so important because other people go, well, this isn't really important, so you should get rid of this. Okay. 4, reference the definition of a word. So you want to avoid, according to the Webster's Dictionary, autism means this. Okay. Or according to this, blah, 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 the word tantrum means this, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Because you do need to define words. However, you don't need to go, according to Webster's Dictionary, sadness means this. Instead, you can just say sadness is defined as this in certain research and you can cite them, right? But you don't have to say according to Webster's because I do see that a lot times with students. They'll go, according to Wikipedia, this is what this means, right? I don't know. That's not how you write it. Okay, so now let's actually start to analyze an introduction paragraph. If you look at the PowerPoint, you will notice that there are purple words. The purple words describe what that statement is all about, okay? So attention getter, again, remember that was used for thesis, right? Okay, so I'm gonna read through this without saying the purple words, but you need to look at it as you go along so you understand why that statement means what, okay? All right, so here we go. After the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on New York's World Trade Towers and the Pentagon, the debate surrounding racial profiling in airports intensified. Many people believe that profiling was the best way to identify possible terrorists, but many others worried about violations of civil liberties. While some airports began to target passengers solely based on the Middle Eastern origins, others instituted random searches instead. Neither of these techniques seem likely to eliminate terrorism. Now, many experts in the government and in airport security are recommending the use of national ID cards or safe travel cards. If every US citizen had such a card, airlines could screen for terrorists more effectively than they do now and avoid procedures that single out individuals solely on the basis of race. So isn't that a really interesting paragraph? Like it really talks a lot, but it's also interesting, right? And you all got that in one paragraph. So you get the feeling that this paper is going to be about these national ID cards, about racial profiling, and the reason why, which is why it was caused all this, is this terror attacks on 9/11. We're going to go through the rest of the paragraphs as we go along, but we're breaking apart each part, remember? So we're going to go now to the next part. Okay, the body paragraphs. The body paragraphs are the ones after the introduction. So each has a basic structure, again, paragraphs. Middle paragraphs between the introduction and the conclusion represent distinct logical steps for the argument. So if we introduce 3 different ways to help the presenting problem, we'll know that each of those paragraphs will focus on those. Right? So the body paragraphs also have topic sentences because we're going to say, let's say that the first way for you to help someone is through narrative therapy. So when you write your first sentence in that paragraph, you're going to really focus on narrative therapy. You're going to say something like that. Okay? Then you're going to have supporting details, and that's from your research and how you're able to combine all your research to talk about this topic of narrative therapy. And then you're going to conclude, use a conclusion statement for that specific paragraph. Topic sentences are placed at the beginning of the paragraphs, may have but does not need transition. Transitions are basically helping to move from one paragraph to the next paragraph to the next paragraph. Okay, so first, second, and third are usually very common when it comes to like transitioning from topic 1 to topic 2 to topic 3. You can also use the word finally for the last paragraph, or moreover, or in addition, or next, then, and after, or furthermore, or previously. Again, these are just some suggestions. You don't have to use them when you do your paper, but that may be helpful in guiding the reader along. Okay? All right, supporting information and evidence. So after the topic sentence, you're going to deliver your first supporting detail. So you're going to deliver facts, you're going to deliver statistics, so, examples, quotes, and transitions. You don't have to do all of those things, but you should do some of them in each of those paragraphs, right? Because that's the whole point. So you might deliver facts about narrative therapy in the form of statistics. It might be 91% of people who go through narrative therapy when they leave or when they're finished say that they are much more happier, right? So that would be a statistic and a fact that shows up. Or narrative therapy focuses on telling a story. That would be a fact because that's what narrative therapy is all about. Okay, so you want to also maybe provide examples of that. So it could be about maybe addiction and then talking about how narrative therapy can help with that. Okay, so forth and so on. And concluding sentence, sometimes, therefore, consequently, or as a result, are ways that you can start your sentence that concludes that topic. All right, let's hear an example of a body paragraph still pertaining to the 9/11 article that we were just reading before. All right. Perhaps the cheapest and most efficient security method is a so-called safe traveler card or national ID card. A safe traveler card or national ID card would be about the size of a credit card, contain a computer chip, and cost little to produce. In some ways, these cards are like Easy Pass devices that enable people to drive on highways, bridges, and tunnels without having to stop and pay tolls, cited in Dershowitz on page 590. By scanning the card, airport security officials would be able to obtain background information from government databases for every passenger. Flying history, residence, credit card spending, travel habits, phone records, criminal background, and fingerprints and iris patterns. Quoted by Sapphire 587, or summarized or cited. It is easy to see how such a card could expedite security checks at airports. One could tell at a glance whether a person should be searched or let through. All right, so now you're starting to see the topic sentence and supporting info, how to support that info, and then or how to explain that that example, and then concluding statement. You can see all of those things in this, right? And so when you start writing, you should also do something very similar. Now we're talking about the refutation paragraph. So usually in argument essays, they're also known as concession paragraph or counter argument or refutation. Refute, which is the first part of that word, basically means to kind of like argue against, okay? Acknowledge that there are valid points in the opposing argument. This way, you don't look so narrow-minded and just say, my view is the only correct view, right? Maybe there's actually more than one right answer, right? So you need to be able to acknowledge that to show that you're fair. Shows your credibility as a thinker because you will have your own original ideas. However, other people will also have it and maybe you're both right, right? Even though you might prefer yours and they might prefer theirs, you can still both be right and you want to acknowledge that. It also strengthens your argument because you show the reader that you thoughtfully considered both sides of the argument before reaching your position. Don't make the refutation paragraph so good that the readers prefer it over yours, also known as countering. So when you do it, obviously you wrote about these 3 points that you want to help for autism, let's say. You don't want to do the argument so good that they're like, well, never mind. I don't think these 3 things are actually as good as what's already there, right? So you acknowledge it, but you also want to make sure that your paper talks about it in a better way than other people's papers. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the actual words that we would use in a counter argument. So here are ways to start an opposing argument. But blank is not completely inaccurate. So what you're saying is, even though they're wrong, they do have a point, right? And that's totally right because they're going to probably believe that about your paper. Or it is often argued that, or it is true that, or opposing views claim, or at the same time, blah, 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 right? So all these things are basically saying that, you know, there are multiple truths and they're both correct, or all of them can be correct. You can also use to counter the argument, nevertheless, blah, 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 or however, or on the other hand, right? So these are other ways of just starting your paragraphs. All right, now let's hear a counter argument paragraph, still pertaining to the topic that we've been talking about, which is 9/11, and also these national ID cards. Okay, the thesis was national ID cards prevent racial profiling. All right. As attractive as Safe Traveler cards or national ID cards are, they are not without drawbacks. For one thing, as Easterbrook notes, these cards would expedite security procedures only for travelers who do not mind volunteering such information to obtain a card. Moreover, they would not prevent passengers with clean backgrounds from bringing weapons or explosives on board, as was the case in the September 11 attacks. Perhaps the biggest drawback is that some people believe that these cards would deprive people of their privacy and that, for this reason, their disadvantages outweigh their advantages. See how that paragraph really talks about, oh yeah, you say that this is all good, but how about all these things that we did not talk about, right? Which is, you know, the people who did the 9/11 attacks, they all had clean records. They've never done anything before. So a national ID is all about what have you done before, you know, so these people would technically be able to pass through really easily as well still, even with these national ID cards if they had it back then. So again, I'm like, oh, that does make sense, you know, because a lot of privacy is now going to be lost if you show where you live, what kind of credit card spending you have, all these other information that we were talking about in the earlier paragraph. So before, in the previous slide, was the beginning of your counter argument. So now let's put it in. However, there are many who disagree with these contentions. While national ID cards could lessen a person's anonymity and privacy, This is a small loss that would offset by a great increase in personal security. To Dershowitz, a self-proclaimed civil libertarian, this trade-off would be well worth it. According to Dershowitz, the national ID card would only be a little more intrusive than a photo ID card or social security card. Best of all, it would reduce or eliminate the need for racial profiling. Anyone who had the national ID card could be allowed to pass through airports or building security more expeditiously, and anyone who opted out could be examined much more closely. Such cards would be enabled airport security officials to do instant background checks on everyone. The personal information in the system would stay in the system and never be made public. The only information on the card would be the person's name, address, photo, and fingerprint. So right there is the argument, right? Counter argument. Obviously, you can always say, well, I disagree with some of this stuff. That's what the whole point is, to be able to address and say, I'm not pretending like the other ideas and other points don't exist. You're saying it does exist and I get it. However, my argument is stronger than this argument. All right, feedback from example. Make sure that your writing is calm, clear, true concern and reasons why people oppose the opinion. Show that the writer is aware of what is going on from both sides. However, there are many who disagree with these contentions. That's what you're trying to get them to feel, right? While national ID cards could lessen a person's anonymity, this is a small loss, right? So for some people, giving up all your privacy is worth it so that no one gets killed, let's say, in a terrorist attack. It makes it so that it seems like a good idea on the surface, but they're not good enough. Again, complement their views. The trade-off will be well worth it if, blah, 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 blah. So you're saying, although this is good, it might be worthwhile to consider this as well. Conclusion. You have written and organized a convincing essay. Now it is time to wrap up all the main parts. So you want to revisit the values of the essay, restate the thesis. So you don't want to write the exact words. So you don't want to have twins in that sense. You want to have cousins. So you want to restate it in a different way, but still bring up the same points as the thesis. Review main points, consider unexplored areas, and then leave the reader thinking. So at the end, you might go, there might be need for more research on this topic. That leaves a little bit more leeway saying that we need to explore all these other parts. Maybe you might say something like, in terms of Hispanic or Latinx or Latin family, things might be different than what the research says for African American families. Don't do this. Oversimplify the message. Blatantly refer to the actual essay. So you don't want to say, this essay shows you blah, 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 right? Because we already know that this is your essay. We already know it's an essay, so you don't have to state it like that. Okay? Introduce new arguments. Again, save it for another essay. You want to keep it very specific, very narrow to your topic, and don't go into other things. Soften your argument or repeat your thesis like a list. Again, sometimes people do that. But again, you don't want to copy word for word what you wrote in the intro in your conclusion. Here's an example of a conclusion statement. It is clear that the only acceptable way of ensuring the safety of airline passengers is to begin a program to issue safe traveler cards or national ID cards to United States citizens. These cards would screen out those who are unlikely to be terrorists and would also eliminate the delays that currently characterize air travel. Most important, they would help prevent terrorists from hijacking American planes. At the same time, by making racial profiling unnecessary, these cards would help protect personal and civil liberties of Americans. Only by instituting a national ID card system can the U.S. make certain that the terrorists who attacked the United States did not hijack the liberties that are so precious to us. Right? So you're summarizing all the things that you have discussed before in the final conclusion paragraph. All of this was taken from these two links here, so please feel free to click on that. Again, as a college student writing your papers, although there's 5 components, they can be longer. Like I said in the structure that we looked at, there could be multiple paragraphs about point 1, multiple paragraphs about point 2, multiple paragraphs about point 3, but they all should be consistent and organized in that section. Don't move it all over the place. The introduction should be at the beginning. Do not put part of the introduction at the end, because that's weird and that doesn't make sense. So that's what we're talking about when we say organize. You know, you introduce a topic, and then you'd have point one, point two, point three, and then a conclusion. And that's how you're going to write your paper.